So, in order to become a better cartoonist, I'm copying pages from graphic novels that I love. And Killing and Dying by Adrian Tomine is easily one of my favorites. It is a collection of 6 short pieces that, much like a short story collection. And I'm going to do my best to try and break down the brilliance of Tomine's storytelling. But I'm going to start by showing you my drawing and try to describe some of the things that I learned in the process of making it. The first thing I'll say is I've never had to try and draw figures so small before. And you'll notice I didn't do the greatest job. I use a really rough drawing tool, so my rendering will ultimately always look kind of incomplete. I'm not trying to make a perfect copy. I'm trying to understand his decision making. I'm trying to take the drawing as far as I need to get a grasp on what he's doing and no further. At least that's my excuse, and I'm going to stick to it. The other thing that continually blows me away is just how amazing and descriptive his contour line drawings are, while remaining absolutely minimal. Some of these drawings are so small, but he always succeeds in providing everything that's essential to understanding the space, the details, the character expression, and nothing more. The sense of economy in his work is truly staggering. I also have to say that, I always feel like I'm getting really close, and then I try to align my drawing with the original at the end, and it's always humbling just how far off mine is in comparison. But that's neither here nor there. Now, Killing and Dying was published in 2015. It was a New York Times bestseller, and it's a collection of 6 short stories, some really short, only 8 or 9 pages, the longest being 22 or 24. And each story is created in a distinctive and unique style. It begins with a piece called A Brief History of the Art Form Known as Horticulture, which exactingly replicates a weekly newspaper comic strip from the 1980s, in which he alternates the 4-panel black and white strips you'd see during the week with the full-color, full-page supplement you'd see in the weekend edition, right down to the exaggerated bendy dots of the color system of the past. And this choice really confers a tone to the work, one of a really strained sense of humor, to a story that's really about the thwarted artistic ambitions of an everyman. In contrast, Intruders is very stark. It's essentially black and white, and it's about as brushy and as rough as Tomine ever gets. And that really serves to create a really threatening and morally ambiguous tone to this particular piece. And then you have a work like Translated from the Japanese, a beautiful full-color series of images in which we never actually see the principal characters. We only ever see aspects of the environments that they occupy while traveling. So each panel is like a beautiful work of graphic design, and that creates a real sense of ennui. It captures a really deeply poetic sense of absence and loss. So in each instance, Tomine takes a formal approach that serves to reinforce the psychological and emotional tone of his story. I've chosen a 2-page spread from my favorite story, Go Owls, which is 24 pages, interestingly the same length as a regular comic book, and it follows a relationship from the moment of its inception to the moment of its demise. It's not explicit how long the story actually is, but it clearly takes place over several months to maybe even a year or two. And it seamlessly compresses time, moving the story forward through the key moments in their relationship. It begins at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting where we're introduced to our 2 characters, and that includes a man whose name we only learn at the end of the story. His name's Dennis Barry, and our protagonist, whose name we never actually learn. There's no narration or exposition. All of the text is dialogue, and Dennis only ever refers to her as Babe. So the first thing you'll notice is that there's a strict 3x4 or 12-panel grid that Tomine maintains throughout the book. When he needs an extra beat, he will subdivide a panel evenly into two horizontal halves, but otherwise it's a very strict rule that he follows, except in one dramatic moment within the book. Now, obviously, we're really used to this. If we compare for a moment to a classic example, Charles Schulz's Peanuts, a standardized grid is completely conventional. I would say pretty comfortably it was the norm for most of the 20th century in newspaper comics. You'll also notice that Linus is always the same size. He's always full body, like a little actor performing on a stage. This is sometimes referred to as a proscenium model. It's a very traditional approach to thinking about space in comics. Despite being constrained by the grid, Tomine, in contrast, is employing a full range of camera angles. We have long shots that give us the whole environment. We have mid-length shots, close-ups, extreme close-ups. So this provides the full spectrum of cinematic affects that we're really accustomed to. But I'd also say that typically the panel size tends to get adjusted to accommodate these shifts in camera angle. But Tomine doesn't allow himself to do that. And that creates a real sense of discipline to this work. It maybe also creates a kind of leveling effect. It slows down the pacing, and it creates the impression that all moments are equally important. It slows the pacing down, and I think it really compels us to consider each decision he's made, every gesture, every word selection, every moment. So I want to turn now to my rough pages, which are actually the second and third pages of the story. And instead of turning attention to any one particular panel, I thought I would try to start with thinking about the entire composition of the page. I look for some sense of order or organizing principle. So I started by isolating the black spotting. This is the term used to refer to the way in which cartoonists use very rich blacks to create really pleasing compositions. And when I isolate them, all I see is a really pleasing yet all-over distribution to them. I don't see any kind of organizing principle other than a kind of nice sense of organic balance to the way in which they're speckled across the page. You might also notice that this is what sometimes gets referred to as a one-color comic, and that's because in addition to black and white, there is a third color or value used, and Tomine uses it really effectively here to differentiate between lighter and darker things within the image. He uses it to great compositional effect, also further balancing out the entire page. It helps to reinforce spatial relationships. It creates a sense of things in the foreground being more illuminated than things in the background, and so on. So there's a greater sense of depth and even texture to the images without overcomplicating them. And you'll also might notice that he has differentiated one scene from another by using subtle shifts of this third color from cool to warm or back to cool. He often has more than one scene on a page, and sometimes that shift in the scene can constitute a really radical break in space and time, and this color temperature shift really serves to differentiate one scene from another while still helping to ease the transition between the scenes. For example, here we jump from the tail end of their conversation from when they first meet to the moment after they have just consummated their relationship, which again may have been hours or weeks later. We're not sure. What's really striking about this comic is the way in which Tomine controls the pacing and flow of time through a unique repetition of panels. I started grouping together panels that shared the same angle, and as I did, a kind of Jenga-like construction takes form, as each set of repeating panels glom together into these different shapes. There are always unique panels on each page, punctuating this jingle-like structure. And there are some pages that have a majority of unique panels. But here's how the next spread looks. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that there is some deeper code at work here. Certainly there's none that I can identify. But these repetitions reinforce the feeling that we are locked into these moments with these characters. And each moment interlocks with the larger structure of the story, like a kind of armature that effectively allows him to pack a lot of story into a small space. Both of these characters are beautifully defined, and of course this owes to the way in which Tomine crafts everything about them, from the proportions of their faces, to their posture, their expressions, their dress. If we take a look at him, we see he's kind of a hefty guy with a big frame, but he's slouched a lot of the time. He's constantly lighting a cigarette. He's got a scruffy beard and a receding hairline. And he wears, combat shorts with sandals. We get a sense that, whatever's comfortable is good as far as he's concerned. She's attractive. Maybe she has some bad skin, which maybe relates to some anxiety. She appears to be wearing sweatpants. She's got like a shoulder bag, but not a purse or any jewelry. We get the sense both that she doesn't have much money, but also that she's trying to understate her presence. She's certainly not trying to stand out. So this creates a very strong initial impression, and we start to form assumptions about them based on how they look and the decisions that have gone into their appearance. But we really get to know them through their dialogue. I didn't write the dialogue out. Maybe I'm just being lazy, but I'm also trying to train myself to see word balloons as things and to try to understand how they operate on the space of the page or as part of the images. If we go back to our Schultz example, the conventional wisdom that evolved is essentially that we expect word balloons to take up about 1/3 of the panel. Of course, less is fine, but beyond a half, it starts to feel too cramped. And of course, generally, we expect to find them floating in the top register of the panel. Tomine basically follows this convention. It's what forces him to have to draw so small sometimes, and it really foregrounds how important the dialogue is in this story. I'd go so far as to say that dialogue is equally important to his artwork. And as masterful as his art is, he always ensures that it is operating in service to the story. I think this is why he isn't varying panel sizes or indulging in compositional flourishes. He's getting his artistic mastery out of the way of his writing. And ironically, I think this is a more difficult artistic challenge because it's his attention to the voices of his characters which enables us to get inside the complex emotional and psychological dynamic between these two people. So I'm just going to reinsert Tomine's dialogue into my drawing for reference. I'm not going to read it or try to dramatize it, but I do want to try to analyze it a little bit. So to just quickly recap again, we've got two people at an AA meeting. She goes to leave and he intercepts her. He immediately offers her help, and she just as immediately sees that he's just hitting on her. She sees through him and she calls him out. He offers more help to just go for a coffee and offer a bit of advice. And this time she accepts because, as we learn, she really does need help at this point in her life. So if we just look at the dialogue on this first page that I did, what jumps out at us is that 1, he dominates the conversation, and 2, he speaks in short, declarative sentences or phrases. Almost everything he says is stated with a sense of total authority. He says things like, the way I look at it, the way I see it, personally, I get it. Everything is said with a sense of total self-assurance. In contrast, when she does speak, which isn't very often, it's almost always phrased as a question. She's constantly opening up more space for him to talk. There's a sense of her being deferential toward him. It certainly creates a sense of kind of self-doubt and uncertainty, even though she exercises better reasoning than he does. She constantly sees through his flawed logic. In the course of this conversation, he's basically saying, look, I get it. You don't like all the bullshit, and neither do I. I think there's a lot of gray area between being sober or not sober. And she immediately calls him out on this and basically says, well, I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, you're either sober or you're not sober. That's the core tenet of Alcoholics Anonymous. But he says, I take what I need from things on my terms. I get what I want and I use it to my end, to my purposes. And Tomine does this beautiful thing, and it seems really innocuous, but it serves to reinforce Dennis's philosophy. We see him pour some sugar in his coffee, he takes a sip, and then he dumps more sugar in. It's basically a visual allegory of his philosophy that gratification is good. If I like it, I get more of that. That's the whole basis of his worldview. And the conversation essentially ends with him bragging about the fact that he's got it all figured out. He's got his life together. And this is exactly opposite to what she believes about herself. And it must sound like pure nectar to her, because she's at a point where she desperately needs help to get her life figured out. Now, Dennis not only believes he's got it all figured out, he truly believes he's the smartest guy in the room. He doesn't go to AA to stay sober because he very happily consumes all the drugs he wants, because of course that's what makes him feel good. He's at AA looking for a different kind of opportunity. He's trying to find someone like her, someone who is teetering on the margins, who can't quite keep it together by herself, and who maybe is prone to some magical thinking. And so we watch as this totally convincing dynamic pulls them together, in which he professes to value her, to love her, by constantly offering her help, and without any other offers or ideas, she takes him up on the assistance. Now, she clearly has some problems. When we meet her, she's in the process of losing her apartment. She needs a place to live. We learn that she has a hard time keeping down a job. She does make some bad decisions. And he's always ready to assist her. He offers her a place to live, to financially support her, all these things that really look and feel like love. Now, she tries to make a real connection. She offers to talk about her past, her mistakes, her problems, but he really refuses. He shuts her down because he doesn't really want to know her. What he wants is a loyal audience, one that affirms what he believes, which is that he is the smartest guy who's got it all figured out. And when she starts calling him out on his faulty logic or his outright stupidity, the theme of the book reveals itself fully. And that theme is domestic violence. Now, obviously, this is a serious and very difficult subject, and I think it's a testament to Tomine's sensitivity to his characters that enables him to render this truly harmful and toxic relationship in an utterly believable way. He really captures the frightening and seemingly inescapability of the dynamic as we go deeper into the relationship. He's not just a drug user, Dennis is a drug dealer. He's not just a drug dealer, he deals to minors. He's racist. And he confuses self-serving justification for logic, which is to say he's stupid. Now, she is complicit. She's well aware of his criminality, but she clearly believes she needs his help, and she's looking for connection. As is so often the case, when he snaps and abuses her, it's always followed by remorse and a huge performance of contrition. Tomine really captures the harrowing cycle of physical and psychological abuse. I'm not going to give away the ending, but one of the most consistent things about Tomine's work is that he never fails to provide a truly cinematic and rewarding conclusion, and Go Owls is no exception. I know that I overuse this phrase, but one of the most amazing things about this story is that we learn virtually nothing about their pasts, especially hers. There's never a moment where they dump a whole ton of backstory on us, allowing us to psychologically profile them or whatever. And yet the story and its conclusion make absolute sense. because we know who these people are by how they're constructed, by the way they sound, and how they act or respond as the plot progresses. Adrian Tomine began publishing zine comics at the age of 16. These were later republished by Drawn and Quarterly, and he continued to produce under the Optic Nerve title. He's a highly sought graphic artist who's produced many covers for The New Yorker, and by 2002, when Summer Blonde was published, he'd already cemented a very cool and interesting cultural position, I think, as a master of the short story form in comics. His voice has continued to evolve a lot over the past couple of decades, culminating in his most recent triumph, The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Cartoonist. So I'm just going to say it, Adrian Tomine is the Alice Munro of Generation X. I know that's pretentious, but I genuinely believe it. So now, if you're looking for a podcast that has a great archive of interviews with cartoonists, I'm going to recommend the Virtual Memory Show. It's a podcast hosted by Gil Roth, and he interviews all kinds of authors, but he has a whole section dedicated just to cartoonists, including a great piece with Adrian Tomine himself. So I'm going to leave a link to that in the notes below, and I do hope I get to see you again soon.